Alhamdulillah, we have Jordan Peterson and Tommy Robinson co-opting together here a amazing video. I'm Tal the Traveling Clat, your favorite Zionist prince. Let's take a look.
How do you distinguish between the kind of immigration that has brought you the people that you have had friendships with in Luton and the what is it? Is it the grooming gangs that's drawing the distinction? Like, what is it that you're trying to tell people about immigration, given that you also have friends from all sorts of different ethnic groups and races? And you're also denying any allegations of racism or even ethnic prejudice for that matter. And partly you point to the fact that your English Defence League had different groups of people in it, but also your own friendships. So what makes you convinced that you're not a far right figure? And what is it specifically about immigration that you're trying to object to?
I'm not denying it. I'm actually hated by the far right. I'm despised as a race traitor. As I've made comments, so Angela Merkel, David Cameron, these were all the leaders at the time of the English Defence League. They all come out and said multiculturalism's failed. I went on record as saying, actually, you're all cowards, yeah? Because what's failed, if we want to admit what's failed, Sikhism hasn't failed to integrate or assimilate into British society. The Jews haven't failed. St. Lucians haven't failed. Everyone else, they haven't failed. You are taking a problem what's failed, and I just speak about my experience from growing up in Luton. And again, I'll set the record straight. Not every Muslim, okay? I'm not saying every Muslim. Some of the best people I've met growing up are Muslim. Some of the people I love and still have relationships are Muslim. And I challenge any journalist, come to Luton and find me Muslims with non-Muslims. And every time when I was leading the English Defence League and a journalist would come and interview me, I said, you walk through the town and you try and find me Muslims with non-Muslims. You won't find them. You'll have the Muslims and the non-Muslims. Now, we didn't create that. We can't be, on our school, I speak about when I grew up, it was the Muslim playground and the non-Muslim playground. So I grew up experiencing this. I experienced the separation and the segregation, the zero assimilation. And I knew something was very, very different. And until, I think in 2011, I was spending 22 weeks of solitary confinement. And I challenge again, anyone listening to do this. Take the Quran. I was sent in the Quran by a Muslim outreach organisation trying to convert me. So I took the Quran and thought, right, let's look at this. And I opened it and I challenge any of you to do this. And every time it says, do not be friends with Christians or Jews, just write the verse number. You will have pages and pages of verse numbers. So then what you have is children being brought up. And if I brought my children up and all of us as white people brought our children up to do not be friends with black children, we would see hostility and violence sooner. And all of a sudden, when I started dissecting this book, everything I'd seen my entire life growing up made sense. Everything. And these Muslims are being brought up to believe this, to believe that this is the word of God, that this is what they want. That's why we don't have assimilation or integration. So when I talk about the problems, I haven't spoke against immigration, which is why I'm under attack by people who are against total immigration. Quite currently, right now, I believe we need to end immigration. But the whole time I led the English Defence League, I said, no, I'm against Islamic immigration. And that's because you're mixing oil and water and it doesn't work. And I can only speak from experience of what I've seen. The more Islam,
okay, so why is it a problem? Let's assume that at least in part that your argument is valid and that you did experience the Muslim tendency in Luton to be more segregated compared to the other ethnic groups that you're describing. So I could say, well, that's okay. If people want to associate with their own kind as a consequence of their belief, that's part and parcel of a multicultural vision. And so why is it that you object to it? And why even do you have the temerity to object to it? People can associate with who they want. And so then it's not reasonable for you to call out a specific religion, regardless of what it believes. And so what do you think of an objection like that?
Because we have within that confined Islamic community, and we've had documentaries go down and speak to Muslims in Luton who said, I've never met a non-Muslim. I've never met one. Yeah, they're growing up in Luton. They've never met a non-Muslim. So they're going to go through inward looking, and within that community, it's a problem anyway for integration and assimilation, but within that community, and again, I bring on our last episode, I spoke about Al-Mujahideen. Al-Mujahideen are now a prescribed terrorist organisation, but they never were. And I try to explain it to members of the Muslim community like this. You've got a close-knit Islamic community. And within that close-knit Islamic community, there's a bunch of activists who are active every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This group are active. And they're teaching all the non-Muslims that they're teaching supremacy and violence against non-Muslims. Because within that community, that's what's happening. Al-Mujahideen, 60% of terrorists, UK Muslims on terrorism charges or in jail for terrorism are ex-members of this group. Now, within that community, if you change it to the white community of Luton and you have the non-Muslim community, and within there you have 1,000 Nazis who have pace tables set up and are continually promoting Nazism, sooner or later, the violence is going to come out of that community. Well, that's what we've experienced. We've experienced something we never even understood. We had to learn about jihad before anyone knew what jihad was, because it was being taught. Jihad was being taught as part and parcel with the Islamic community within my town. So all of these problems, and that's not just that, there's so many problems that come from the community. The hostile view, the mainstream hostile view against women, but especially non-Muslim women. Well, those non-Muslim women are my daughter. They're my mum, and they're walking through the streets of Luton. And you've got a community that's promoting a negative view of women, but especially our women. And we look at the Quran and we look at scripture, we might understand why. But unfortunately, as soon as you try and have that discussion, you're far right, you're racist, or you're extremist. And the people that are calling you that have no knowledge of Islam. They don't know anything like they're talking about. They don't know Muhammad's teachings. And you're not even allowed to talk about Muhammad's teachings.
Well, sorry, Tommy. Let me bring Tammy into this for a moment. And so, I'm going to introduce her with a couple of different questions. I mean, there are many forces within the Muslim world that are trying to establish something approximating a détente and a peace with the Western world. That's exemplified most particularly with the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords have stayed intact despite what's happened after October 7th and all the activism on the side of Iran, for example, doing everything it possibly can to destabilize the Western universities and to bring out the demise of the peace process that was established under the Trump administration. And so there are positive forces operating within the Muslim community that are trying to bring something approximating peace. And so it's dangerous to segregate Islam as such. You could make this case. It's dangerous to segregate Islam as such because if we can't continue to communicate with the moderates, then the more fundamentalist types that are likely misusing what might be a core religious doctrine to push their fundamentalism and their essentially their race hatred and their sadism. And so it's very difficult to walk through that and separate the wheat from the chaff. Tammy, what I wanted to ask you is, like, you insisted before we did that first interview that you trusted Tommy Robinson. And I asked you why, and I want you to reiterate that. I also want you to tell me if that's still true. And I want to see if you have some questions that you'd also like to levy at him. You've watched what's happened in the last month since we did our interview. And so maybe you could reiterate for people why you thought we should do this interview and what drew you to want to talk to Robinson to begin with, and what your conclusions have been given what we've gone through in the last month.
Well, first of all, I'd say that I'm for free speech. And I see Tommy as putting a light to issues that nobody else will talk about, and that's important. And he's also outlined his experience personally that has been his guiding light to, it looks like what it has been his guiding light in what he has done. I guess my question would be, why is it that Muslim culture has become so strong? And I know that there's lots of people there, but what happened to the Christian? What happened to the Christian word and the Christian values that uphold our societies? I think from my point of view, I think that there's been a disillusion of our Christian values. And so this other more aggressive force has come in and taken our place and taken the place of what used to be a place of Christianity. And so I think that it's complicated. Yes, I think that immigration isn't as orderly as it was. So now, people are getting into not just the UK, but into Canada, into United States, into Sweden, into lots of different places. And people aren't using their common sense to regulate that. So
And their faith.
common sense and faith. Well, common sense and faith go together in some way, because it means you're using your intuition, which is using something that's smarter than you to find your way, that you're not guiding, but you're finding, it from within your heart to do what's best. And everybody here is now so self-guided that I think we're getting in each other's way more often. And I can't speak for, I've looked at the Quran some, and I am making my way through it. And I agree with you, Tommy, that we should be reading that book, because everybody should know, if we're not going to read the Bible, let's read the Quran. I mean, we have to know what we're up against. And we've left the Bible. We've left the Bible, and we're not going by those values anymore. And so we're going to be lost. And and those policemen and those government officials, who are those people? Who are those people that they're not willing to stand up for British values? And they're not willing to tell the truth. Like, what's going on with them? Why don't they have the conviction to be? I mean, these are their families and their communities that are going to suffer if they don't stand up. So what's going on that Tommy has to shout from the rooftops? What's going on with the Muslims?
What Islam has, and what Islam has casted over your societies that you don't have, is a fabric of homogeny, of cultural and somewhat ethnic homogeny, or at least the idea of it. They sell you on this concept, as long as you subscribe to Sunni Islam, of homogeny of faith, and that brings you into a family, into the ummah. If you're Shia, you're a part of a different part of the ummah, but for Sunnis, it's way bigger of a concept, because if you're Shia, you're basically the devil. And when you sell this idea where you're not just some random white person who's cultureless, which I don't believe in, or some black person who's cultureless, you were taken as a slave 300 years ago and now you don't have a culture or family to belong to, you're a Muslim. You're a part of the Islamic family, and that makes you a part of a global community. And that's something they'll always have above you. And this is what I say, this is my message to the West. Why are Jewish people so successful? Why is Am Yisrael so successful? Why do we overcome the challenges bestowed upon us all the time? Because we work like a family unit. We really operate and function like a family unit. We are there for each other. We're not great, and sometimes we hurt each other. A lot of times we're dysfunctional, but we operate like a family. And it's something that you see in the Muslim world. There's an attempt of it. They do a very bad execution of it, because they end up killing each other all the time. They're always murdering each other, especially in the Middle East. But until you guys in the West start looking at yourself as special and beautiful and unique and being proud of your heritage, and it doesn't mean you need to become a supremacist, but it means you need to connect with where you came from, who you are, your stories, your culture, what makes you great. Stop victimizing yourself. Stop not victimizing yourself. Stop shaming yourself. You aren't bad, and you aren't ugly, and you aren't terrible, and you aren't all the things that they say that you are. You need to embrace your heritage. And communities are so important. I always bring up this example to people who look at the Middle East. The Middle East was once this massive coalition, or not coalition, but this massive diverse area. It was the opposite of a coalition. And you had the same thing in North America and in South America and a bunch of places with indigenous peoples. And then a colonial empire like the Arabs or the Europeans came in and turned this into something else. I personally don't believe these concepts. They don't scale up properly. They're almost a bit communist if you think about it, or socialist in a way, because they're trying to force one way of life onto everybody. These micro communities, these micro families, these groups are what make us amazing. And it doesn't mean we can't operate with each other. We'll always have a difference of opinion, how he does this, but when you stay small, you stay powerful. You're small, but you're mighty. When you try to scale it up, you start losing who you are. You start losing your identity. What makes me a proud American is that I'm an Israeli American. My community in America is what makes me proud to be an American, because my parents made it to America. Their success, or my success now, is predicated on the fact that we fought to succeed in America. We followed the American dream, and while I would say I'm probably the first one in my family to really properly succeed or branch out. It's a pretty remarkable concept because I didn't let the place define who I was. I let the place make me proud of it, make me proud to be a part of it by tapping into my ethnic heritage, my familial heritage, using my color skin, my family story to prop myself up, to tell my story. It took me a while to figure that out too, but a lot of the success has to come from this, from my story, from my family's history, and the fact that I've been able to develop this incredible mind, this brain in that place. It's a fusion of those two things, but it can't be extreme. You can't erase who you are or where you come from, because you'll never, I don't know, at least I'd love to hear your concept of this. Maybe I'm just rambling, but I'd love to hear your take on this in the comments, because I don't think that these societies can scale up properly until we go back to the micro. It doesn't mean we need to compete with each other and hate each other, but it does mean we need to focus on the small. The communities are what make us strong. I'd love to get your opinions on it. Love you guys a long time. Goodbye, Clats.
If you believe in my content and want to support me, just know your help is needed. There's a bunch of great ways to support me, being PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, or joining my Patreon down below. Patreon is the best way to support my channel, and you'll get a bunch of cool perks depending on what tier you join. Another great way to support me is by buying my merchandise on thetravelingclat.com. I regularly drop new merch designs like this beautiful hat or this amazing shirt, where you can support the channel and get something cool for yourself. I also have an amazing Discord community with people from all over the world. Thank you so much for your support.